Well, now we're going to talk about St. Paul. And I've got to be honest, until a couple of years ago when the Pope said we're going to have a year of Paul, I kind of had a bit of an arm's length kind of relation with Paul. I liked some of the things he said, but I wasn't quite into him. But thanks to that sort of year of meditation on Paul, I found myself getting really into this wonderful advocate, this wonderful proclaimer of the good news. And just some pointers from his early life. He was born in Tarsus, which was in the south of present-day Turkey, a coastal town in what we call present-day Turkey. He was Jewish by birth, but he was a Roman citizen. It's not quite clear how he attained that citizenship, but his family seemingly must have been able to arrange that. And this made him, because he was in a port town, he probably spoke several languages. He would have been able to speak Greek, probably Latin, and obviously his from his background in his family, etc., and the fact that he later seems to have studied in Israel, he would have had Hebrew as well, or Aramaic at least. So he's culturally amphibious but quite cosmopolitan, because he moves in these different circles, and that's going to be very important for his proclamation of the good news. A practical guy, even though religious minded, a tent maker, and there's plenty of evidence of that from Acts of the Apostles, and he was educated by Gamaliel, one of the great rabbis of the time, in the Torah, the ways and laws of Moses. Now, he was pretty good at it. Paul seems to be one of those guys, probably a bit like some of these characters here on X Factor, and they're quite confident of their abilities, you know. He says, actually, I was the best, one of the best in my generation, you know, not a modest man in that sense. But why do we find, we first come across him really in the Acts of the Apostles in the New Testament, persecuting the Jesus movement. And we can only think that that's partly because, you know, he had that zeal for his own religious traditions that would lead him to want to safeguard the purity of the faith of his ancestors, and that this led him to actually act and seek out official confirmation for his work from the high priest Ananias. We see that in Acts 5 and Acts 9. And not, again, a man, a shrinking violet. We often think of religious people as quite, you know, for want of a better word, a bit, you know, wussy really. But, you know, clearly he's a man that, in supervising the stoning of Stephen, is quite a fay with the hard edges of what it was to be in a society like that. But suddenly this man who's been supervising the murder, let's say the murder of Christians, is suddenly changed on his way to Damascus, where he's seeking to find other followers of the way. Something turns his life around. Now, we often imagine him as falling from a horse. There's no mention of a horse. But in the description, it says Saul in Acts 9. Saul was still bringing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord. And he went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues at Damascus, so that if he found any who belonged to the way, men or women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem, where they'd just killed Stephen. Now, as he was going along and approaching Damascus, suddenly a light from heaven flashed round him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? He asked, Who are you, Lord? And the reply came, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. But get up and enter the city, and you'll be told what you are to do. The men who were travelling with him stood speechless because they heard the voice but saw no one. Saul got up from the ground, and though his eyes were open, he could see nothing. So they led him by the hand and brought him into Damascus. For 3 days he was without sight, and neither ate nor drank. Now, we don't know whether that's a stylized 3 days to imitate Jesus as like death and resurrection, but the fact of the matter is you've got this man who is suddenly going to emerge from this experience transformed. Now, you can compare that little account with the other accounts of it in Acts and in his own testimony to Paul's own writing in Galatians. And people argue whether this was a conversion. It slipped into language now. I've seen the light, or he's had a Damascus experience, which means somebody who's changed completely. And both of these associate with Paul's experience. But some argue that it's not a conversion, insofar as for Paul, it seems to have been an illumination of what all his religion meant, all his striving meant. It's like a deepening of who he was, rather than change. So in that sense, I'll leave that with you. What we can take from this testimony, Acts linked with Paul's own writings, is that he persecuted the Church of God, that he believes he met the risen Jesus, and that Paul's life is now going to be a mission to outsiders And in each of these matters I put here, there's a humiliation and consolation for Paul, because they each demand a transformative acceptance that he's been wrong, yet paradoxically they will be the locus of his greatest insights. I want you to think for 20 seconds about the moment in your life when you suddenly realised you weren't just a bit wrong, you were completely wrong. So wrong about something, you felt sick. No going back, you were wrong. Whether you accused someone or something was said and didn't happen. How did you feel? Can I have some adjectives, please?
Like crap.
Crap.
Sick.
Sick.
Felt like a kid again.
Yeah, in fact, kid, you're starting again, like, you know, you don't want to be born again, but that's a start point, isn't it? I felt like a kid again. Any
Guilty.
guilty, yeah?
Felt a bit awkward.
Awkward.
Situation. Like, really sorry as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, like.
Okay, so now put yourself in Paul's shoes. He's feeling, to say the least, a little awkward. The very Lord, the God I have tried to serve, I've ended up persecuting the God I long to serve. I am Jesus and you are persecuting. He said, who are you, Lord? Lord means authority figure, the one who is Lord of my life. And he realises somehow that he's never met Jesus. He's never met Jesus. So the mind-blowing thing for him is to realise that this rabble, this bunch of ne'er-do-wells who seem to be talking nonsense, are actually the presence of God on earth. Oh my God. And I've just killed one of them. He's feeling awkward, but probably crap, sick and guilty as well. And I think what we've got to get into here, this is going to leave its mark on him. No matter how exasperated he gets with the churches, he never loses sight that they are the presence of God on the earth. That the people are, and this is what's going to blow his mind, does blow his mind. So, let's think about poor old Paul. He starts his Christian journey at the end. He meets the risen Jesus. He doesn't meet the Jesus of Galilee or the Jesus of Calvary. So, in this sense, he gets the glory first, which got its own pressure. You know. So he meets the risen Lord. The risen Christ identifies himself with the Jesus movement. So that means Paul has to completely transform his way of thinking about these uneducated Galilean normals. And that ultimately, and this is the most important point in a way that I want to end this section with, he ends with this conviction that self-righteousness is not possible. It can't be. Because he tried to be righteous and he got it all wrong. And yet, God still had enough mercy to love him and to touch him and speak to him. So, he wasn't worthy, only God was worthy, and God reached out to him. If you like, a God killer. And if God could reach out to a God killer, then God can reach out to anyone. And it doesn't depend on how good you are, it all depends on how good God is. Let me repeat, it doesn't depend on how good you are, it all depends on how good God is. And God is very good.